Welcome everyone. Welcome to our Green Shakti talk with Peggy Dulany. For those of you who are new to Green Shakti, I'll give a brief introduction to Green Shakti and then a brief introduction to Peggy Dulany. So Green Shakti is a nonprofit environmental program founded by Sri Shakti Amma in 1996 in Piram in South India. And it grows and plants trees. Over 1.8 million to date, manages 2 tons of waste each day with its zero waste management program, educates local school kids about Mother Earth and so much more. Most importantly, really, it is a collective and it is committed to deepening the relationship between people and nature. So I want to say that today's Green Shakti talk is by donation. As many of us are aware, India is in profound crisis at the moment, and we are dedicating all of our donations for today's talk to Annadanam. The literal translation of Annadanam is food offering or giving a meal, and in temples around India, it is absolutely customary that food is offered at no charge to devotees or guests who are visiting the temple. But the temple complex is now closed due to mandatory lockdown, and the hospital, the Sri Narayani hospital, is absolutely overflowing with need. And the ashram guest house has even been converted for COVID beds. So despite this, Sri Narayani Piram is offering 1,500 food packages per day at the gates of the temple and in the surrounding villages of Tirumala Kodai in the region of Vellore. So this is just an opportunity for us to open our hearts and give what we can. We can be empowered in our giving, no matter the amount. You know, every donation helps feed another living being. And we all know that this international crisis is really a test for mankind. And there has been a lot of giving this past year, and there is fatigue and there is struggle. And we are being pushed beyond capacity. But if there's ever a time to give, it feels like now is the time to give. I know that yesterday, India recorded its highest daily coronavirus death toll and the first to register over 400,000 new cases of coronavirus. So it's overwhelming. But as Sri Shakti Amma says, utilize any opportunity for service and you will feel joy, because it automatically creates good energy. And that is the energy that we want to create. That is the energy of peace and love in this world. We're going to put all the donation links in the chat box. So today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Peggy Dulany, an incredible leader and philanthropist and a good friend to Green Shakti. Peggy Dulany is chair and founder of Synergos, a global organization helping solve complex issues around the world by advancing bridging leadership, which builds trust and collective action. We'll talk a little bit more with Peggy on what bridging leadership means. Peggy founded Synergos in 1986 to promote trust and collaboration among grassroots groups and government or business leaders and organizations, people who otherwise would not have access to each other, so that they can develop long-term relationships and forge new paths in overcoming poverty. In 2001, she co-founded Synergos' Global Philanthropist Circle with her father, David Rockefeller, to support philanthropic families in using this approach. And I'm really excited to talk about what this means. Her career is incredibly diverse. We will put a link in the chat box because her resume goes on and on. I just want to add a little bit more, so bear with me. Peggy has sat on over 30 nonprofit and corporate boards, including Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, which is, as I said to Peggy earlier, one of my favorite retreats, not too far from New York City, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Africa America Institute, among others. She runs 2 socially responsible businesses, a grass-fed beef and guest ranch in Montana, and ecotourism operation in Namibia. Through Synergos, she also guides wilderness retreats that offer participants a safe space in which to reflect on their deepest purpose in life. How extraordinary is that? Peggy signed me up for that. So today we have an incredible agenda. It's, we're very ambitious in what we want to accomplish in a small amount of time, but we will speak about philanthropy and finding one's soul purpose and leading in times of great crisis. So we are so happy that you are with us. It's an amazing opportunity for us to learn from your vast experiences. So type your questions in the chat box. We have Peggy for another half hour to 40 minutes. Thank you, Peggy. Welcome. Peggy, you're just on mute.
Yes,
yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm sure Natalie is on the line.
She is indeed.
Green Shakti.
Yeah.
And, to have this be something that Green Shakti wanted to do. It's one of my favorite initiatives. I know that Amma is so loving of the natural world.
Yes.
And Green Shakti is her manifestation of a lot of that. So it's very close to my heart.
Thank you, Peggy. So maybe we start a little bit with environmental initiatives, because as you say, they are close to your heart. They're essential to your being. And I know that especially you write about this, the wild natural environment has been an incredibly important theme in your life. And I would even say a true partner in some of your greatest epiphanies.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah. So, well, I could just riff on that for a little while. I had the opportunity in 1997 to move to the state of Montana, which for those of you who don't live in the US, is in the western part in the Rocky Mountains. So it's high, dry country, very beautiful and full of wild animals as well as domestic animals too. And so I was living where there are bears and wolves and wolverines and moose and elk, and had the great privilege while I was working on writing some things to simply reside in that environment for 13 years. And it really enhanced my sense of what is the divine.
Wow.
So I came from a place where I was working very hard, founding and then running this organization called Synergos, which we can talk about a little bit more. But I needed to step back and really connect more to spirit and to the divine, and that was the perfect route for me to be able to do that. So that has led to several private and family initiatives around protecting the soil and the areas in Montana between domestic animals and wild animals, so that it's not one or the other. There's a bit of conflict between, ranchers and farmers on the one hand and environmentalists on the other. And I had the opportunity in the valley where I lived and still spend quite a bit of time to try to bring people together to find common cause, because everybody loves that land. They wouldn't be living on that high, harsh land otherwise. And then with my family on a farm that my mother started a number of years ago in upstate New York, where we converted from a commercial grain operation to first organic and then now biodynamic, and are doing research on how managing the soil well can sequester carbon in the soil rather than emit carbon. So a lot of this, which is related, of course, to climate, is about how can we manage our lives, but also the land that we steward in ways that will sequester carbon. So those are two things. And then with my father in 2001, we founded Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, which is a teaching and research and practice organization. It is a farm using all kinds of principles that are good for farmers and for farming. And it also now is becoming more of a communicator about how we can do this in our lives. So last year under COVID, for example, there was a program in which I think it was something like 4,000 cooks and non-cooks started very small, like 3 meter by 2 meter kitchen gardens, and were given lessons each week online about how to plant, how to grow the vegetables organically, etc. So it's a way of really finding out what the best ways of growing and harvesting and eating the healthiest food. So those are the particular things. I guess the only other thing I would mention is that the Global Philanthropist Circle has different interest groups that people sign up for. And one of the biggest ones is on climate. And a second one is on regenerative agriculture. So those are two top of the list priorities of things that the philanthropic families that join the Global Philanthropist Circle are concerned about, with obviously good reason.
Yeah. So, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, but before we jump into the giving circle, I'd love for you to walk us through Synergos.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about why you founded Synergos and its philanthropic model. You talk a lot about its approach as cultivating, bridging leadership, right? And the importance of building trust. So walk
Yeah.
us through that model. It's unusual.
Yeah, well, it took quite a few of the 34 years to figure out exactly what the model should be. We started with the value system, that what was missing from reducing poverty and increasing well-being was that people weren't collaborating with each other. So we set out initially to support groups, whether they be government, civil society, community organizations, business, they recognized that there was a significant problem. So in India, for example, we spent 7 years in the state of Maharashtra working with a very diverse group to understand the causes of child malnutrition. And in the end, pilot several initiatives which actually led for a reduction in severe child nutrition of children under 5 from 39 to 23%. And it really had to do, when we tried to figure out what were the key factors, it had to do with these diverse groups who didn't know each other, didn't trust each other, usually had nothing to do with each other, building bonds of trust, in part because they took field trips to different parts of the state to look at both the best examples, but also the nature and the severity of the problem. And by spending 5 days together and then talking about their experience at night, they made common cause with each other, and they really begin to develop bonds of trust and friendship. And then the second other really big piece was that we took them on a retreat, a week-long retreat to the Himalayas, in which they spent 3 days alone in a tent, just reflecting on what was their true purpose in life. Nothing about child nutrition on that retreat. It was really just peeling away the layers of what was getting in the way of their realizing their true purpose. And when they came back, people had had the same dream on the same night. They prayed for each other while they were apart. Most people had never spent a night alone. They were terrified, but they felt so triumphant and happy when they got out, happy that they made it, happy to see each other. And it put them in an extremely creative frame of mind, so that the pilot programs that they designed after that, first of all, everyone agreed to them. And second of all, the way they were implemented took the best smarts of the communities, of the businesses, of the nonprofits, and of the state government. So this really was kind of the proving point for us that this could work on a larger scale and that it could actually solve problems. But I'll stop there and then you can.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, and we'll make sure to put it into the chat box, that you gave a really fascinating TED Talk that spoke about this example, about stunting. And the results from 39 to 23%, like that data is almost impossible to believe.
Right.
It's so successful to turn the lives around for all these children who now have a chance of a real healthy existence and productive existence. It just seems to me that, especially now, many leaders are failing to foster that sense of trust, right?
Mhm.
And in all organizations and in corporations, then especially loyalty is not fostered in employees. What interests me about your model is your emphasis on inner work.
Mhm.
And how do you make this sustainable? How do you increase the self-awareness that you need to build this trust?
Yeah. So that was a perfect segue for where I was going to go anyway, because what we realized is why, if this can be so successful, why isn't it happening more often and in more places? And you could answer it in several ways. It's expensive to get people together, and people have to want it. We never go anywhere unless we're invited, and we never go anywhere unless there's funding for the initiative to happen. So it's a complicated thing to do. But what we really realized was that most people carry a lot of, whether it's fear or rage or grief or shame.
Mm.
And if that forms the basis for how they present themselves in everyday life, it's like wearing a mask. And many of us are sensitive enough to know if we're not seeing the real person, if we're seeing somebody who has a mask on. And that doesn't inspire trust if you don't know who the person behind the mask is. So the question then became, how can we create a safe enough space on these retreats, whether it's the purpose retreats like the one in the Himalayas in India, or the more personal group retreats that we do in Montana, and we've done them in Australia and Brazil and Mexico and various other places. So by doing these retreats, usually it's about a week long, and it is an opportunity for people to little by little sit in a circle. That's an initial part. Sit in a circle and just say what's in their heart. And that may be hard to do on the first day, but interestingly enough, the first person who says something really from their heart, and because we don't in everyday conversations always talk from the heart, often tears accompany that.
Mm.
And it's like you can't fake tears, at least not unless you're an actor.
Mm.
And so that comes across to the other members as very real, authentic, vulnerable, and true. And so that then inspires the others. This is just the beginning. There's so many stages to it. We won't have time to go into all of them tonight. But that really is the beginning of people maybe just peeking out from behind their mask a little bit. And then as we do other kinds of exercises, the most important one being spending time out in the natural environment. Because, first of all, the beauty, even if it's a single tree in an urban environment or a little community garden, the connection that one can feel, that one can generate if one goes out open to it, is amazing. And it actually can kind of mirror back to one what maybe the issues that have been under the surface have been, whether it's fear, shame, whatever. And somehow our earth is our mother, and it is loving and safe. Other things like hurricanes and typhoons and all of that apart. But I mean, fundamentally, we get our nurturing, our food, our nourishment from the earth, our shelter, everything. And so once we can feel that, that in itself generates a sense of safety, which can be elaborated by the group itself. And then people feel a sense of belonging. And then instead of maybe being defensive and judgmental, they become more curious. And that can inspire in creativity, for example. And then once you're really out of the monkey mind brain, then you can be in the flow, which allows you to both see yourself better, see other people more effectively, and open the heart, feel love, feel gratitude, feel compassion for others, and be less defended and internal. And that's when the trust is built and it gets to the point of what I call serving with love. Because I believe that all of us, when we can diminish, and we never get rid of these internal things, but when we can witness our issues rather than live them, then we're much better able to witness other people. They see that we're really listening to them. They can trust us better. And so this is behind the whole concept of what we call bridging leadership. So I just go into that.
That sounds great. I just wanted to just emphasize something that caught my attention, which is the relationship between an open heart, right? When you have that open heart, you have more of the ability to listen, with empathy,
Yeah.
which then leads to the likelihood of the trust that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, the trust and the love and
Yeah.
the wanting to serve. Yeah, so what we began to realize, there's some people who are kind of natural, what we call bridging leaders. That is to say, they can reach out across divides. They can convene people of different beliefs and hold their credibility, even if they're close to this person over here and this person over there, and the two disagree. So a lot of those people who have that naturally either were not terribly traumatized or who have grown from their trauma to get to that place of forgiveness and open-heartedness and compassion for others as well as for themselves. And we actually first witnessed this. We were working with community foundations around the world to help strengthen community foundations. That was our first foray into philanthropy. And the people who gravitated toward those foundations, because they were wanting to serve the people in communities, but often they were from influential families or sectors or whatever. So they had kind of one foot in different arenas. And they'd already experienced the pleasure, I would say, of being able to reach out and bring people together. So there are other things, taking a systemic approach to diagnosing the problem, being inclusive, so that you're not just talking to the experts, you're also talking to the communities that are affected by the problems. Those are the trainings that we do when we do workshops to train people to become bridging leaders. But so much of it has to do with having done the inner work, connection to the land, connection to spirit, to the divine, and to oneself. And those are really the forces that make it possible to stay compassionate, stay open-hearted in the face of so many awful things that are happening around the world.
Yeah. Peggy, let me ask you, so you founded Synergos, and then how did the idea of the Global Philanthropist Circle arise?
Yeah.
And what have you achieved with it?
Yeah. Well, and it's 20 years old this year, so we're celebrating.
Congratulations. That's a big milestone.
Yeah. Talking to people around the world, because we've always worked in many different countries, and mostly we'd been talking with people involved in development or government people or business people. But we began to realize that a lot of the initiatives, the good initiatives that like NGOs are doing, or community organizations, or even business philanthropic initiatives, in those days, there weren't so many that were focusing on what was kind of this missing link of developing leaders who could bring people together, and recognizing that if people didn't start working together, rather than at cross purposes, the problems were not going to get sustainably solved. So that's when we began focusing on that. And then we began realizing that most of the philanthropists we came across were also not focusing on the need for that. And many of them, particularly, let's say, in Latin America, or even in parts of Europe, and many in the US too, and I would even say India and Southeast Asia, were more focused on what I would call charitable giving. So it wasn't taking what I would call a systemic approach to solving these problems. And there's plenty of room for charitable giving, as we know. I mean, right now with COVID, there's just, it's very, very much needed. But to get to the root of the problems, I think you need a more systemic approach and a more collaborative approach. So it occurred to us that if we could form a network of philanthropic families from around the world, and there's about 100 families that are members from about 34 countries, that if we could form that, then they could form a peer learning network, and they could exchange learnings. We also take learning journeys to different countries, and see problems, see good solutions, meet interesting people working on solutions, meet good bridging leaders. And so that was the reason for it, and that's what we did. What has become increasingly possible, and ironically, especially starting in COVID when everything went virtual. So instead of having physical gatherings where you can't get everybody together, at any one time, we would have lots of journeys and meetings and all of that. But when you have a webinar and everybody's at home, it's a lot easier to get them on at the same time. And so we began to focus on different problems. This week, we're having a webinar on COVID and how the members are, and some non-members who are like NGOs, but people who are addressing the problems in different parts of the world. So that again, people can learn from each other what the possibilities are. The climate group is continuously talking about how they can complement each other's initiatives. There's a group of young Brazilians and some non-Brazilians that are focusing on indigenous people in the Amazon and how they can gain more control over conserving the land that remains unlogged. These are just examples of the kinds of collaborations that, when you get people working in the same direction and together and applying not only their money, because, by the way, I don't believe that philanthropy is only philanthropy of the rich. I mean, the definition is love of humanity. And there's even a book called Philanthropy of the Poor, showing that people with less financial resources proportionally give much more of what they have than people who are rich. So the philanthropy we talk about is not just money, but giving of yourself, of whatever you have, whether it's skills or connections or volunteering. All of those things are valuable. And so that's kind of how we got started, what the values are behind it. And we've got some amazing members. And we also have a network of civil society leaders, and we're doing more and more blending across those networks so that people are working together from different points of view.
And Peggy, do we have access to that information on the Synergos website?
So the list of the members is a closed list. It's actually, the Global Philanthropist Circle is a solicitation-free zone, because you can imagine if everybody has their pet project, and if all they did was go around asking the other members to support their project, it wouldn't build the kind of trust that we've been trying to build. But increasingly, as we have webinars that are not only for Global Philanthropist Circle members, but other people interested in a particular problem, and you can go on the website and find out about them and sign up for them, then you get more of a mix and match. And we're finding that's very enriching.
So we made the bold move to include discovering your soul purpose in this talk, because we titled this talk "A Life of Philanthropy and Purpose." And in your article on building trust works, you speak very honestly about your soul's purpose. Can you tell us what it is?
Sure. Maybe I'll just say why I think it's important to find one's soul purpose first.
Perfect.
When we're children, our imagination is infinite, and we can want to be anything, but as we get older and we go to school, or we have to go to work, and we have to earn a living, and maybe our parents are telling us we need to be this rather than that we had imagined, we begin to kind of shrink ourselves. And so whatever that infinite imagination that we were born with, and that sense of purpose that I do believe we are born, our soul is born into this body to do something in this life, it kind of gets shifted to one side in many people, or shrunk. And so the retreats, part of the reason for the retreats is to help people peel away the layers, if only initially in their imagination. Because, if you're 30 or 40 or 60, you've already got a pretty structured life. And it may not be possible, even if you can rediscover what that purpose was, it may not be possible to completely give up everything and just go for it. But even reconnecting with what it is somehow inspiring and enlivening. And, people are often then able to carve out at least a piece of their lives to do that. So in my own case, I really had no words for this beforehand, but the part of the retreat is that you fast for 3 or 4 days, and you don't bring any toys, no camera, no books, you just bring a tiny little notebook. And as you meditate and pray, you're meditating to reveal to you what your soul's purpose is. And what I realized, and it took me a long time to even understand the original words, which are no longer the ones that I use because they were very confusing, is that to me anyway, and I think to other people, that my purpose really is to help create the safe spaces in which people can connect to their full self. And I'm particularly interested in the masculine and feminine aspects of ourselves, because I believe we have both. But very often, whether societally or familially, those get skewed one way or another. You can see the unhealthy masculine as it takes place in the world at large, with people grabbing for power or being greedy or whatever. And you can see the unhealthy feminine, whether it's in becoming subservient and just giving up or giving in, or becoming very mean and aggressive and hostile against those who the feminine might have perceived is suppressing them. And so to recover the healthy aspects of both, so that we can have the courage and the proactiveness of the masculine, and we can have the nurturing and the propensity to convene, to bring together, of the feminine. Of course, there are many other qualities of both. And through that, become our fullest self. And through that, then be able to realize more fully the purpose for which we were born.
That's beautifully put. I know you touched a little bit about fear, and that's something that you have addressed, and you've also addressed anxiety. And when you did this retreat, from what I understand, and correct me, Peggy, if I'm wrong, you were around 50 when you went, which became really this turning point. And this idea of shrinking ourselves feels really paramount as something that one needs to overcome in life. I just wanted to share what I think is this incredibly beautiful quote by you. I had no intuitive or generous voice to offer to the world because of strict boundaries related to fear. But the process that I engaged in led to a shift, which inspired the creation of retreats into the wilderness, which I also had the opportunity for when I moved to Montana in the wilderness. I wanted to create a similar effect for others. Not that this was easy. In fact, to today, that harsh voice still follows me, and I need to engage regularly in practices to soften it. Practices like meditation or yoga, deep breathing, moving my body, being outside. So what I am on is a path, not a destination, and it is a way of getting there, and it is a daily practice. So I wanted to share that quote with everyone because I think all of us are searching for those daily practices and fine-tuning, constantly honing what our purpose is in the world. And like you said, we are all born into this body and all have what to do in this world and how to benefit society. So maybe we can start some questions. People are already writing a few questions in the chat box that we'll get to, but maybe we start off with some of your personal practices, Peggy, and how you center yourself in order to facilitate your soul's purpose.
Thank you. So, I was just reading the question that was in the question and answer, so I can probably bring that in.
Sure.
First, a meta statement, which is that the state of the world is such that it would be very hard not to have fear and anxiety. And I can certainly speak for the US, but I suspect that it's the case in most parts of the world, that the crises that are happening, whether they're political or climatic or health wise or related to poverty or migration or conflicts, it tends to generate that kind of fear. And so it is literally a daily practice to counteract it. And for me, because I do have chronic anxiety, it's really important that I do several things daily. And one is the spiritual or meditation practices, whether it's chanting or meditating or praying, and that I do throughout the day at different moments. I don't sit down for 1 hour and do it, but I wake up, and before I get out of bed, I start doing some of that. I do it before I go to sleep, and then at different moments in the day. But it's also biologically, unless you move the body, it's very difficult to move the kind of energy that fear or rage or shame or grief inflicts on the body. So some form of movement practice, whether it is yoga, which is a principal one for me, or going outside, and also for me, dancing is another big one, because dancing inspires joy.
Yes.
And, ideally, to do some kind of physical practice that will get the heart rate up, and because that then produces, now we're talking scientific, produces endorphins, which are the natural tranquilizers which can help calm us down. And I really believe that if everybody got to do those kinds of things, those two in particular, meaning the sort of mental spiritual on the one hand and the physical on the other every day, that we would have a much more peaceful world, and people would be a lot happier and calmer, and they would treat each other better, and they would stop destroying the planet.
So amidst this unprecedented global crisis, what keeps you up at night?
Mm. So many things. Well, first I should say that actually the global crises are less likely to keep me up at night than my own inner anxiety, which is not to say that I don't feel, when I turn on the news and see what's happening, that I don't feel that and that I don't hold that in my body. But, climate is certainly one, but also injustice, inequity is just, for me, a huge one. The fact that there is so much injustice, and whether it's ethnic tensions, racial tensions, caste tensions, all those things that divide people from each other, that make it very hard to find a genuine sense of peace. And it's almost as though some of the inner issues that I was talking about earlier, um, if you don't feel whole and good in yourself, and if you're more in judgment than you are in curiosity or compassion, it probably makes you feel better to think that there's someone worse off than yourself. And I happen to believe that part of the racism in this country and in other countries is particularly by people who need to feel better than, and therefore want others to be worse off. That's a very harsh statement to make, but in Isabel Wilkerson's book called Caste, that's a big piece of the point that she makes. And until we can begin to undo whatever it is that's making those prejudiced people feel that way, so judgmental, so racist, so negative toward others, it's not going to go away. The attitude will still be there even if the laws are changed. So it's a huge, huge transformation that is needed in the world. And it's needed on a spiritual level, on a legal level, on an economic level. So those are the questions that sometimes keep me awake. How can we do this? How can we get these things that I'm talking about, the bridging leadership and the convening and the partnerships and the inner work, how can that spread so that it gets to more and more people in more and more parts of the world?
Do you feel overwhelmed by the responsibility?
I think I used to more than I do now, for the following reason, that we can each only do what we can do. And I think, growing up in a wealthy family in a wealthy country, I suffered from a lot of guilt. How could this be that I have all these privileges that other people don't? And actually, for a good part of my life, I would not permit myself, for example, to compete for a prize or, anything like that, because I thought, I'm so privileged that I shouldn't even try because it might take it away from someone else. And at a certain point, a book came out called Small Futures by somebody who I later got to know, which looked at the education system in the US and tracked success, people's success in life. And it had so much more to do with the community you grew up in and the level of poverty and disadvantagedness than it did academic performance. So that made me realize that actually created the whole underpinning of my philosophy of Synergos, because by depriving myself, I wasn't going to be using all of the assets that I could put to work, the connections that I could have, the privileged education that I had, the influence that potentially I could bring to bear, as well as the financial resources. So instead, I began taking the attitude of, let's just apply what I can do. I'm not omnipotent. I can't do everything. So this is my contribution to the world, is this philosophy and the way of trying to carry it out and the way of trying to spread that word to more and more people.
I think a great leader has to have a lot of hope
And a great philanthropist has to have a lot of hope and share that hope for the world.
Mm.
What keeps you hopeful?
The beauty of the human spirit. I mean, fundamentally, when you see the numbers of people who are willing to serve,
Mm,
willing to act with compassion, even more compassion than empathy, because empathy, you can fall into the other person's shoes. Compassion, you hold your own sense of self and boundaries, but you use all of your assets to try to make situations better. And with regard to the question that was written in the question and answer, I totally agree with Amma that, you know, everyone deserves the kind of beauty and rejuvenation, restoration that is possible in the confines of what they live with. And to the extent that they then also have a desire to serve or to contribute financially or otherwise to the best of their ability, it's just like what I said about myself. Then you're doing what you can do, and you're not spending a lot of your energy beating yourself up for not being able to do more than you can actually do.
thank you, Peggy. That's beautifully put. If anyone has any additional questions, we'll be wrapping up soon. Talk to us, Peggy, about the importance of gratitude. I feel like that can't be stressed enough. What is your view on gratitude?
I learned a big lesson from my favorite uncle who died when he was 94. And he became more and more spiritual the older he got. And one day he said, you know, every day when I wake up, before I get out of bed, I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for today. And I just dwell on that. And to me, gratitude is such a path to opening the heart and keeping the heart open. And once the heart is open, then one is in a position of giving of oneself just because naturally you want to. If you're feeling grateful for what you have, and I'm not talking about material things, you know, it could be a beautiful sunset, or it could be, you know, growing something in your garden that is nourishing, or anything, a friendship, that then enables us to be more likely to want to give back in whatever way we can. So I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I feel so wonderful when I'm in a state of gratitude.
Peggy, give us your last few words of advice to all of the philanthropists and budding philanthropists and all of us who see what's happening all over the world, and for many of us in India at the moment. And we want to act, and we want to participate, and we want to help feed people. What are your words of advice to all of us?
Can you be a little bit more specific?
So as we open our hearts,
Mm-hmm.
as we identify our purposes, right? As we want to give back to the world, and let's say to India specifically at this particular moment, because that country is suffering so much. What are your words of wisdom to keep us on this path of giving, of hope, of participation, and to avoid the pitfalls of overwhelm, fatigue
Yeah.
that comes with just the times,
Yeah.
just comes with the news?
Yeah. Well, I come back to the daily personal practices,
Great.
because we're not going to be able, even the group of us devotees of Amma, or whatever group you want to say you're part of, isn't going to be big enough to solve it all. So in order to stay in gratitude, in order to stay with our hearts open, or to come back to it when our hearts close because we are in fear or shame or whatever, because that will always happen. Our brains are perfect vehicles for regenerating all the traumas we suffered at different times in our lives, and either judging ourselves with it or feeling like failures or whatever. So it's coming back to the commitment to practice, the commitment to connecting with the earth, and with each other. I mean, friendship is so important in this too. And that may be with animals, you know, it's not only human friendship, it may be with trees. But those are the things that restore me on a daily basis, and bring me back into gratitude and back into love and back into wanting to serve with love.
Thank you so much, Peggy. This was a wonderful time spent.
Sonya.
All of the links are in the chat box. We have learned so much and will continue to learn so much from Peggy and all of Peggy's initiatives. And I think what we can say is that we need to stay curious and stay compassionate, listen to one another, remain courageous, and don't shrink. So thank you so much, Peggy. A lot of love coming your way in the chat box and a lot of appreciation for your time.
I can feel it. Thank you. And if anybody wants to learn more, www.synergos.org is our website. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. Stay well. Thank
good morning,
you.
good
Share
night.
your heart.
Whatever time frame you're on, everybody.
Yes, they're from all over the world. So thank you, Peggy. Looking forward to the next time. Sending you love and appreciation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This talk really honors the Divine Mother, the Divine Earth, and we are feeding people in India. So please donate. Those donate links are in the chat box. Let's help our beloved country. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peggy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.